Welcome to Mission Evolution Radio Show with Gwilda Wiyaka, bringing together today's leading experts to uncover ever-deepening spiritual truths and the latest scientific developments in support of the evolution of humankind. For more information on Mission Evolution Radio with Gwilda Wiyaka, visit www.missionevolution.org. And now, here's the host of Mission Evolution, Miss Gwilda Wiyaka.
Hurt, betrayal, grief, and loss. Once experienced, they tend to stay with us. But is there a way to transform them into something positive? Mission Evolution Radio TV show is coming to you around the world on the Exxon Broadcast Network, xzbn.net. With us this hour to discover the alchemy of hurt, betrayal, grief, and loss is Christopher Phillips. Christopher is the author of Soul of Goodness and has devoted his life to fomenting civil discourse of a kind that enables the most diverse people to discover uncommon common ground. Dr. Phillips has been a network fellow at Harvard University's Edmond J. Safra Center for Ethics, was 2012 recipient of the Distinguished American Leadership Award, and founded the nonprofit Democracy. He's co-founder of the entrepreneurial endeavor Socrates Group, the first ever senior education fellow at the National Constitution Center, and has been senior writing and research for the University of Pennsylvania. His website, ChristopherPhillips.com. Christopher, thanks for joining us on Mission Evolution.
Thank you. It's such an honor.
It's wonderful to have you here. So, Christopher, you have a doctorate. What's it in?
I have a doctorate in communications and several master's degrees in natural sciences, teaching philosophy for children, which is unheard of, and humanities with a specialty in philosophy. But I didn't want to be a professor. I just wanted to learn.
Just wanted to learn. You're still
I did.
still hooked on learning, right?
Absolutely. And you don't ever need a formal degree of any kind to be a great learner and thinker and doer. It was just a route that I took about things that I felt like I couldn't learn well or in a disciplined way on my own.
So, how did you become interested in hurt, betrayal, grief, and loss?
Well, it's sort of that I think that they were always part of me since I was very young, that I didn't know it. This last my work on Soul of Goodness emerges is the first book that wasn't intentional, wasn't planned out, but that I try to take life setbacks and not overcome them, but channel them in ways that I think will be perhaps resonate with others and be of help to them as well. But looking back, I realized that all of my dialogue initiatives, which I began in earnest in 1996, at a time of polarization that I'm actually almost nostalgic for now. We've reached such a abyss and chasm at the same time. I think that I come from a family that had moats, that did not have healthy discourses of a kind in which we could learn and grow together. And so I think out of that craving for discourse, I started these groups. There was in co-ed at the time. I would have never been able to tell you that when I started my first dialogue initiative, Socrates Cafe. And I have to tell you, I think I start everything in some ways for pretty selfish reasons, because I want to learn and grow from other people. I'm Chris the Inquirer. I'm not Chris way up there on the pedestal, but I'm just curious and perplexed and inquisitive. And I think many people who come to our gatherings have had their share of hurts, despair, loneliness.
Haven't we all? Haven't we all?
And
Chris,
so we feel, yes.
I'm sorry, I understand you're of Greek heritage. How's your upbringing influenced your philosophical pursuits and your writings?
Well, that's a great question. I learned so much of what I do at the feet of my very strong-willed Yaya, my Greek grandmother. She immigrated with her husband, Philip. My first name is Philip, so he's my namesake. They came from this tiny Greek island of Nisyros in the South Aegean. They came to escape Mussolini and his minions. They'd conquer the island. They came through Ellis Island, and that was a century and a year ago now. And so she was the first Greek teacher in the Tampa Bay region of Greek culture and language. So instead of passing my summers with my friends, going swimming and things like that, I was under her tutelage, learning about all things Greek. And at the time, I was a pretty resistant pupil, but it stayed with me, dormant in a way. But when I saw that my beloved society of the United States was in a time of peril, it reawakened. And all of the lessons and learnings from her had clearly not just stayed way deep inside, but they were brimming now. And it was my way of doing some service for my country because I'd never been called to service. For instance, I never had to register even for the draft. And so these dialogue initiatives, Socrates Cafe, Constitution Cafe, are my way of bringing people together and helping them discover uncommon common ground, not just without, but there's an interiority to it as well. We feel more close to ourselves at the same time. One of my favorite philosophers, Hannah Arendt, spoke a great deal about that and how Socrates helped us in that kind of dialogue.
It seems like one thing that has kind of gone by the wayside to a certain extent, to our great detriment in the U.S., is that beautiful close bond with our elders. And to hear you say your grandmother was so influential, what do you think happened there, and how can we correct that?
That's an amazing insight. In Greece to this day, for instance, at the onset of the pandemic, they treasure and value seniors like no other. When the Greek Ministry of Health uh, lamented the death of of their seniors, he cried. They
Oh,
they treasure them and value them so much in a way that there's a coldness almost in too many elements in the United States. I think that the only way to resuscitate that is one person at a time, one group at a time. One of my favorite gathering places for what I do when I started 28 years ago is nursing homes, assisted living residences, and senior community centers. And again, it's because they have so much wisdom to share. Quite often we bring groups of elementary school students and they sit one after the other with seniors and they share their knowledges and wisdom ways. They have this sense of why like nobody else. Those at the earliest stages and later stages, and they're like kindred spirits. And I'm just part there for the ride because I learned so much from them as we explore questions.
that's what's so fun, and what we've missed so much is that the younger have the why, and the elders have the answers, and the people in between don't have the time.
They don't, and I think that we simply have to make the time and take the time. If we don't have it's not leisure. It's not just for pleasure. It's for to enrich every aspect. Some people can't help in this world but work 2 or 3 jobs and they it's so expensive. But they need that 15, 30, a minutes or 1 hour, blessed hour every week. They need that time for some reflectiveness. And they don't just need it. We as a society need it. And we
For
need to
sure.
give each other that gift. All I can do is create the places and spaces, including virtually now. And then it's up to others. And people take me up on it because it's a huge commitment, but it's such a beautiful one.
It is. So, how have ancient Greek ideas influenced your view on modern challenges?
Well, you have to understand that even though I have all these, formal degrees, everything I learn about things Greek, I learned from my grandmother. So, they so many academics have just made it dry and dusty and desiccated and soulless. When all these terms, the Greek word virtue, arete is this Greek term that I live by. It means all around virtue, excellence in all of life's dimensions. Somehow that's gotten not just short shrift, but it's absent without leave. And when these terms are taught in the academic setting, these things are not just dictionary definitions. They're not just concepts. They have spirit imbued within them. When we talk about eudaimonia, joy, it's not just happiness, as is too often scandalously translated. It's a joy-filled life, and it can be a kind of joy that comes from the other side of despair. As we make our way through these dark tunnels, as we find creative pursuits that make it possible to plow our way through. These are the richest terms that I'm trying to revive, steal back from academia in many ways, and reintroduce to the world, because they're all imbued with what I would call Socratic spirits. And that's how I learned these traditions. The reason my yaya, my Greek grandmother, had this indomitable, never say die spirit, she didn't really like the United States, quite honestly. She missed her tiny island of Niceros terribly. She channeled it through her entrepreneurship. She channeled it through her poetry, and it was that example that, but also the sense of service. They all go hand in glove: personal growth and service to others, selflessness in the best sense, and selfishness and selflessness. They all are inextricably entwined by the Greek way, as I learned it from my yaya, and I try to impart that as well with my family, with myself, and with society.
Well, we're about out of time in this segment, but I was taught the same way that you're talking, that there's the balancing unconditional love of self, unconditional love of other. You can't have one without the other. And the closer they are to balance, the closer your life is into balance. So that's a beautiful thought, beautiful way of putting it. So we will have to take that commercial break. Christopher and I will return very shortly. So don't you go away. This is Mission Evolution, www.missionevolution.org, and we're coming to you on the X-Zone Broadcast Network, xzbn.net. Is there any goodness left to be found in the world? With us this hour discussing hurt, betrayal, grief, and loss is Christopher Phillips, the author of Soul of Goodness. Christopher, you speak a lot about goodness. How do you define goodness as opposed to badness?
I think that we tease out those elements within ourselves and with others that or make it possible to have more of a social conscience. This idea that there's degrees of everything, even those, for instance, in Hitler's Nazi Germany. And I'm sorry to bring up such a horrific subject. They're quite often loving fathers or loving owners of pets. And everybody was born a little teeny tiny baby, including people who turn out and do demonic things. So for me, it's all about, well, how do we make ours more world in which, when there are signs of sociopathy or psychopathy, that we can recognize it early on, because we have more tools at our disposal now to deal with this. But quite often, we're just blind to these things. Or there's a culture of silence, and we tend to look the other way. So how can we all sort of stand up and be counted? If somebody says a view that I find personally repugnant, some people react violently, viciously, aggressively. I might well defend such a person in a sense, even if and as I find a view repugnant, because it's a fellow human being. So at the very least, I want to know the story behind why does this person have a view that I might consider evil. And to me, evil is that which is an obstacle or derails human growth, human development, human exploration, human inquisitiveness. What do we do? First thing, story. We need to learn people's stories. It's and if they do say something repellent or abhorrent, let's find out why they think what they do. Let's find out that story. Quite often, that in and of itself can be rather transformative for the person sharing that story and the person's listening to it. Just taking that time. There's college classes on rhetoric and debate and persuasion, forensics. Where's the college classes on the art and science of listening? Listening with all our being, with all our soul, with empathy. Listening to a view that's hateful without hating that person who's sharing that view. These
That's
are
adding
practices.
gasoline to the fire, isn't it?
Well, these are practices that sometimes get me in hot water because how can you dare even allow that person a forum? I don't necessarily see it that way, though. I totally understand and empathize. But if we don't recreate those habits of careful, empathic listening, we need a world of storytellers. For me, it all boils down to that. And if somebody genuinely listens, a person who's filled with hate suddenly is filled with less hate. I have found again and again and again. and bridges begin to be gapped uh, in a
So if
world
a
in which so many are deliberately creating walls.
so if a person is full of hate and we respond the normal way is like and judge against them, then that creates this huge chasm of polarities, right?
Well, what you
Polarization.
see, yes, it's
And
exactly
so
right.
so if you do what you said, you meet them where they are. There's no room when you meet somebody where they are. You don't have to buy into it, right? You just meet them there.
Yes, you just meet them there, and guess what? You meet yourself there too, because it's really easy to see the flaws and foibles and blind spots of others. It's really, really difficult to see that you might have some yourself. And if I ever point that out, no matter how gently, what, who, me? Oh, no, I don't have any. Oh, I've never said a racist thing in my life. Oh, I've never said a hateful thing in my life. Well, hold on. Maybe you have, or at least to yourself in your own mind. I dare say most of us have. Uh, so it's we can serve as gentle mirrors into our own souls by engaging in a certain way with others because
Do
we
you think
always
it's
have to take that time, that honesty.
do you think it's fairly typical that the more violently we react to somebody else's viewpoint, the more hidden those aspects are in ourselves?
Oh, there's so much deep truth and wisdom in what you just said. I dare say, let's look at the world's conflicts without, I don't even have to mention them. Let's look at the people who are the driving forces behind these conflicts. And let's ask ourselves, do the leaders involved have more in like, more in common than they differ? You know, seeing their opponent as subhuman almost, seeing with innocence caught in the crosshairs, pawns in their games. Those are difficult questions. I'm not going to provide the answers, but tend to, people quite often tend to hate one another because they have so much in common, just as you pointed out.
So let's take this to another little level here. When a person is in a particular mindset, fairly polarized, they start collecting people around them that can agree with that mindset. Are they actually
Mhm.
creating the reality of that mindset by group agreement?
I think, I think that they are. I think it becomes almost a self-fulfilling prophecy. And so that's all the more reason to stand up and be counted. You know, it's so easy to point the finger of blame for why this is happening at the politicians, the demagogues, people in positions of great influence and power. But my firm and fervent belief is that we all can be the change that we want to see. You know, a Gandhi, he wasn't. I mean, these were unknown, rather obscure people who decided that they were going to be the change that they wanted to see in the world. But it starts out with one person here and another there who decides that they're going to do it all, risk it all to bring about a better day for humanity. And sometimes they don't have happy endings. Look what happened to Socrates, for heaven's sakes. So, but we have to make that decision for the sake of our families and for the sake of having a long term view. You know, looking at not just the next generation, but 500 generations hence, 1,000 generations hence. You know, we've lost that long term sensibility, but you know, we have to act. We have to. I've had, you know, people felt very threatened by me just asking why, but in certain settings. But that's all the more reason. I've been in maximum security prisons. I've been to nursing homes. I've been to elementary and daycare. Um, if we can tap into that inquisitiveness, we might get the sense of there, but for the grace of God go I. And it
And
doesn't make us
recognize
innocent. Yeah, but we're fellow human beings.
recognizing that and owning it gives us power over it in a way, doesn't it?
It is, and it's an act of sublime courage, in my point of view. Uh, just anytime we really listen fully to somebody, it's transformative. You do not emerge unscathed, but it is an act of courage.
If you are in a group and they're all polarized and everybody's in agreement and you choose to stand for the truth, not in a combative way, but just hold the frequency of truth and saying, I see where you're coming from, but isn't that when groups will then attack, like the wounded chick? They'll suddenly attack because the frequency is so different.
Well, you see people suddenly will get in defensive posture and sit back and like you see that they're without even understanding it that they're suddenly in attack mode. And you try to think of a way without skirting the issue that allows them to get back into thoughtful mode. Anytime the U.S. has an incursion abroad and it becomes a yes/no question, should we or shouldn't we be there? They're ready to get at it and loggerheads, knock down, drag and back and forth. And I'll say something like, "Well, what is a just war? What is a just incursion?" Just like the Greeks of old, and I learned from Homer that both sides might have right and might to some degree on their side. But it gets people back into a thoughtful range, and they might, even though they might differ deeply on what wars are just and which ones are not, they suddenly discover they might have very similar philosophies on nonetheless on what constitutes a just and unjust war. So that's where I kind of come in to help people discover on their own uncommon common ground without forcing it down their throats.
Forcing it down the throats. There you go. So let me translate this a little bit. What you're doing is providing a non-confrontational, common, neutral heart space where polarized entities can start to move back
Mhm.
together. That sounds like a pretty challenging
Yes, and
position to be in.
it's challenging. And the thing is, if you look at polarization in a form of a circle instead of just a continuum, let's look at the continuum, but let's bring it around. And you see that people on both sides of extremes tend to have more in common than they differ in terms of character traits, but also specific concrete philosophies. And so if you have the chutzpah to put yourself in situations, I've been, with people from Tea Party and MoveOn.org who are supposedly, theoretically, and ostensibly on different sides of the spectrum, they might actually discover shared concerns, even if they differ deeply on the solutions. But if we can't get together, if we can't talk in a thoughtful way, sometimes we're going to fail. We're going to fall flat on our faces. I've done thousands of these, and I still have my times. But I learn. We have to have that time when we just reflect. Well, what went wrong? If it wasn't for life setbacks and tragedies and reversals, then we lose opportunities for creativity and growth. So
Absolutely.
you
Well,
just don't sob and cry in your spilt milk. You dust yourself off, brush yourself off, and you get back in there
get back in
because
and
your
try again. Well,
ancestors are right here on your shoulder. They're right
it's
there. My
that
dad is right here on my shoulder.
it's that magic time. We're going to have to take another station break. Christopher and I will be right back to continue our discussion. So please stay right there. This is Mission Evolution, www.missionevolution.org. What does love have to do with it? This is Mission Evolution, missionevolution.org. With us discussing the alchemy of love and compassion is Christopher Phillips. His website, christopherphillips.com. Christopher, how does one transform hurt, betrayal, grief, and loss into love and compassion?
I think that the first step is to recognize with humility that for a circumstance here or there in life, we might have turned out another way, might have turned out quite differently. That takes extraordinary humility and insight. We don't necessarily forgive and forget, but it gives us some sense of empathy. We still want to make sure that wrongs are righted. But we look at others and their example. Look at Nelson Mandela. He was confined for 27 years in Robbins Island prison, and yet he emerged from that without resentment, without bitterness, but rather with this sense of love and compassion. And he developed the Truth and Reconciliation Commission out of that. That there, but for the grace of God, we could have been wound up that way too, and we well might if we're the ones suddenly who have unwieldy power. So recognizing examples and stories of people who themselves have suffered the unspeakable. And so many Hmong refugees from Vietnam came to the United States and had suffered unspeakably, yet they still had this inner joy. still had this light. And to be to know them and be part of their orbit has been world changing for me. And as I was going to say, also, when I speak of long term vision and having that, I'm also speaking forward and backward. Carrying our relatives on our shoulders, it's not a burden. It's light. It's light. The people who fought against apartheid, they were always thinking about their ancestors and that they would drive them forward and give them that courage. And so I think it's always this oscillation, but it's very personal and very universal at one and the same time.
When you're speaking of the ancestors on our shoulders, and earlier we were speaking about how in this country we've tended to kind of sideline our elders, but we've also sidelined our descendants. So here we are stuck in the middle with no support on either end. Do you see that as being a major cause of some of our despair?
It's a terrifically major cause. It leads to nihilism, siloing, further siloing, at a time and climb when it's all hands on deck time. It's too easy to use, oh, I didn't get a good education at school, or I didn't do this didn't happen. It's too easy to use those things as crutches. But his father died when he was 7 of a massive heart attack. My
Ouch.
dad was just 7. They just got in the US, but he had this joie de vivre. Never felt sorry for himself. He took life on, and he achieved so much. So when I think of feeling glum or sorry for myself, my dad, everything was taken from his home basically. I think of, well, okay, I lost my inheritance, financial, but what did I inherit from my dad? Inherited these qualities, of not just being Pollyannish, but how do we take the most tragic times in our lives and make good out of them in ways that can also be of help to others, and that's very important. Otherwise, we're just contributing to the siloing and polarization at a time when we can't afford to do that.
Absolutely, we can't. There's that deep pit we're about to fall into. So, one thing that a Celtic concept is that the ability to experience joy is absolutely limited by the willingness to experience despair. What do you say to that one?
Well, I think that if we try to fend it off, then we make a bad situation exponentially worse for ourselves and for others. We have to think about all those others in our orbit who are being impacted by this, even as we're not conscious of that. Look at our greatest works of art, paintings, poetry. They were developed out of deep despair, much more often than not. They're examples for us, and so we don't have to become a famous artist ourselves, but we can nonetheless learn to use creativity to channel that hurt. And creativity can be simply looking at things with different lenses, looking at our workaday life, looking at things and reaching out to others, just asking another person that you've seen a million times but never asked them, well, tell me a little bit about yourself. Tell me your story. You get outside yourself a little bit, and you might find out that they have even more unspeakable hurt and pain than you do.
A lot of people, and I've seen it a lot, I'm sure you do too, view remaining open hearted and in a loving stance as a weakness, as a vulnerability. Do you see it that way, or how do we shift to where we don't have to look at it that way?
Mhm. Well, what if I said, okay, let's say it is a kind of weakness and a kind of vulnerability. Is that okay? uh, because we're all fragile. So many of the people who cloak themselves and bluff and bluster, it's because that deep down in their core, something's missing. They're very vulnerable themselves. They've been shattered in some way, and so they build up these cloaks and protective armor. Uh, I would dare say that that's far more often true than not. So it's all the more the reason to try to reach out to other people. And if you just can't, don't be too hard on yourself. maybe just take things in baby steps and just try to do something that you feel is an act of love each day. It can be anything from a random act of kindness to an intentional act of kindness, where you one of the kindest things we can do, as I've already, you can see sort of the thread of where I come from, is just to learn a little bit about somebody else, not in a prying way, but just to say, how are you? What I've been buying hot dogs from you at your stand for 10 years. I've never asked you a question about yourself. You having a good day? In a truly genuine way, in a way, because so many people ask, "How are you?" You can see the blank look in they don't want you to really answer. But what if you really want to? How are you? And it can be life changing for you and for
Have,
that person. Just one
have
person at a time.
Have you noticed how when you take that stance, and you're in a group of people, say at that stand, the hot dog stand, there's people standing around waiting, or cooking or whatever, and you engage at that heart level and that real curiosity level, what changes do you see in the people around, and what causes that change?
You know, and they with because you're not beating them over the head with, "Hey, I want you to be this way too." My mother, she was born in a coal mining camp in Appalachia, and she also had a very difficult life. And she comes from a Scots Irish background. So when you spoke about Celtic ways, that's sort of where my work is steering these days. But they pick up on it. You can stand in this long grocery store aisle, oh, I picked the wrong aisle. This person's taking forever. And you sort of start saying, oh, but we're all in the same boat, or you had a traffic accident. Everybody has to get out of their car. Oh, we're all in the same boat. Let's get out and talk and have it, make it like a picnic. And it's transformative, So it's like,
You s-
yeah, we're in this together. It's okay.
you speak of love and compassion. How about humor? Where does that play in?
Well, I became a dad late in life. I have an 11-year-old and an 18-year-old, and I'm 65. And so I write these earnest books, and probably Solo Goodness is my most earnest. And I do these earnest works about dialogue. But let me tell you, my kids can tell you that dad has a ridiculous sense of humor. Sometimes it's all I can do to contain it in my dialogues because it filters and I'll think of something funny to say at the most inappropriate time. And I just have to, Chris, don't do it. Don't do it. But it's if you don't have a sense of humor, then if you take things too super seriously, then I think all is lost. Bereft of that sense of humor, I don't know how you get to that point of joy. You may express it only in your private life. Heaven only knows I've lost count of how many times I've done it in my public gatherings, but I just can't stop myself. I learned this. My mother has this extraordinary sense of humor. But it's not with malintent or anything, but I think that you simply have to have it, or over earnestness doesn't get you very far in life. You have to have a glint of humor. And even if your books are serious or your works are serious, your dialogues are serious, there also has to be that sense of humor. And I dare say you're the first person who's ever asked me that. I think that probably there are moments of laughter in virtually every dialogue I've ever held. And I've never thought about that before in my life till just now.
Well, humor just certainly can break up when things start to get too heavy, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
So, what does the process of transforming hurt, betrayal, grief, and loss look like?
Mhm. Well, it looks different for every single human soul. And I think that what works for one person doesn't necessarily work for another. We all will take a different route or path to some degree. It's been interesting that as I shared my roadmap for overcoming unspeakable loss of my father, never the worst part for me wasn't losing the millions of dollars or anything like that. It was not being able to say goodbye to him because of other possibly nefarious souls. They rob me of that chance to say my goodbyes. So what I do is I say hello to him every day. Uh, and when I wake up in the morning, but also through my works and deeds and actions, I know how proud he was of the legacy that I was trying to leave. And so for me, I don't know. Every person again is different. I don't know if I would want to completely get over the sense of hurt and loss and betrayal, because out of that I channel it in ways that lead to kinds of works that are soaked and saturated with empathy and
Well,
sympathy, but
we're
that
going to have
also
to
provide a quirky guide and roadmap.
take another station break. Please stay with
Okay.
us as Christopher and I continue to explore radical transformation. This is Mission Evolution, www.missionevolution.org. Are we there yet? How does one know if they are transformed? This is Mission Evolution, missionevolution.org. We're continuing our discussion with Christopher Phillips. His website, christopherphillips.com. So, Christopher, how can you tell if you're transformed or more suffering needed?
Hmm. You know, I like the term you use, radical transformation. Uh, I I don't know if I can always tell myself if I am radically transformed or not. It might take the insights and wisdoms of others. One of my kindred spirits is somebody you've had on my program, on your program, David Hanscom, for instance. He has this what I would call Socratic revolutionary way of getting us out of our not comfort zones, but just out of our existential vistas and seeing things in such an extraordinarily different way. He's always been kind of a guidepost for me since I had the privilege to meet him in person quite a long time ago. And so I actually write him quite often, and I loved your exchange with him to tell him, oh gosh, he's constantly posting things. You just have changed my worldview on this and that, and he's so we're like a mutual fan club in some way. But the idea is just to say, look, here's another way of looking at things. Here's another. Consider this, and then it's up to you to decide. And you might sort of weave it into that tapestry of other approaches that you also take, because it's not one size fits all. It's not one approach, but it's defining this poetry in a variety of approaches. Sometimes one you might tease out more than at other times that can get you in that point where somebody else might say, "You look different today, Chris. You seem to have a bounce in your step that you haven't had in quite a while, and you don't seem to have so much of that woe is me about you. Something happened today, and probably it's some sort of creative or just simple loving act, and maybe I hadn't even thought about what it was."
So, is transformation a destination or is it a um, process?
It's certainly both. And I think that you arrive at destinations and they serve as springboards for other journeys. And that would you ever want to arrive once and for all at any destination? I would think that as long as I live and breathe, I hope that I continually reach stopping points, but or way stations that serve as launching pads to go to other places. I was recently appointed the first ever philosopher in residence for Humanity in Deep Space program that does collaborations with NASA, and so now it's really got me thinking about human settlements abroad. I think people are looking at that more than ever, given what's happening on planet Earth right now, not just in terms of the conflicts, but also the exponentially worsening global warming. Can we, if we look further afield, if we look into the immensity without separating ourselves from it, if we feel more connected to it than ever? The Greeks of old, some of the most unheralded philosophers of way back when were women. They taught us that time is regressive, progressive, and that we need to look at things in ways that make us understand that we are not just part of the immensity; we are the immensity itself. We are such stuff as dreams are made on, and that we're part of that stardust.
Well, speaking of Stardust, it's that time in the show, and I get to ask you, Chris, what's your mission?
My mission is to become a more loving person. The dialogue groups that I develop are really, I want them to be love-ins. And I have my moments when I am so intolerant, intolerable. What happened to my father was such a malignant, malicious, hate-filled act, in my view. I I realize, God, when I become overwhelmed with a sense of bitterness and hate, that person wins. Those people win. I'm becoming like them. So my mission is to become the converse of such people. And by doing so, you have to love those people to some degree. You have to love to some degree those who've done the absolute worst.
But are you not then living your life in opposition to what they did by trying to become the opposite of it?
Trying to become the opposite of it, recognizing all the while that I may have turned out like them, but for a chance event or occurrence here or there. I think that's one of the things that I learned the most from, for instance, the works of Shakespeare. I started a Cafe for Shakespeare project, and from Socrates, is that most things are not preordained. They didn't. If you read his tragedies, things didn't have to turn out that way. They could have been different, and like that Joni Mitchell song, it all comes down to you. You can soar, you can fly, it all comes down to you. And that element of personal responsibility, of recognizing there, but for the grace of God go I, can go a long way in giving you the kind of humility that you need to not turn out like them. Not in a holier than thou way, but just that, you know what? I can take a different path. I can take a different route.
And
What happened to my
and
dad is the ultimate challenge. And
so like
every day I fight back against it.
so like being grateful for the bad examples in life because it gives you an opportunity to do something different. Is that what you're talking about?
Well, it depends on the example. I mean, if something happened to my wife, my beloved wife, Ceci, or my children, it would be really hard for me to take that route, quite honestly. I don't
We all
know.
have our breaking point, don't we? So,
That would
what
be
does it
mine.
look like? What does it look like if we're unable or unwilling to transform hurt, betrayal, grief, and loss?
Well, we become like stone, emotional stone, existential stone, literally and figuratively. Um, Growth is not possible under such circumstances. I think many of us may arrive at a point when we ask ourselves, is life worth continuing? Is it worth going on if we're going to be like that? And because, I see if I could have a vantage point from billions of light years away, I would think that our galaxy or the universe itself is shaped like a question mark. And I think that, the sense of wonder, one of my favorite books is by Rachel Carson, a children's book, The Sense of Wonder. That sense of inquisitiveness, coming up with new questions and looking for ways to connect with others in this increasingly disconnected world is my only way for personal salvation. Constantly seeking new paths and routes for connectedness, so we don't reach that point, because that's ultimate nihilism. And why do we have children? Why do we bring children into the world if any of us, or even if we don't have ones of our own, why do we, at some way, we have some connectedness with them? Why are we here? And so I think we all have to feel a sense of duty, of service, but of also some self-love that I can make a difference. Some people feel they can't, but they can. They can. Every single person.
And what's interesting is what you're speaking of is exactly the opposite of what's going on in the world, or at least in this country, where everybody is becoming increasingly self centered and narcissistic. What do you see as the result of that stance?
I just think it's chilling, it's unnerving, it shows a lack of a sense of history. All the greatest of the great civilizations and open societies so far have had a period of ascent, stasis, and then irreversible decline. We refuse to look at the pernicious patterns that are repeating themselves today. It would be so easy for me to get into that kind of numbing, paralyzing despair, but I can't. I can't afford to. I can't afford to, because I want for the rest of the world's children what I want for my own children, to be brought up more in a world of love, in a healthy climate, a global climate, and as well. And so I have to get up and dig in my heels and try to be that change each and every day. And so for my children, I'm not a preacher and proselytizer. I just try to set an example, and resonates with a person here and there. And if it resonates enough, suddenly you've reached a critical mass, and suddenly we
Critical mass
become
is
this team of
definitely what we
change.
need. Yeah,
It
definitely needed.
is. So we
So,
got to get in there.
We're getting close to being out of time in the entire program, Chris. What legacy would you like to leave behind?
You know, when I started my first Socrates Cafe dialogue group in 1996, everybody said it would never work. People are too polarized. It was in a little coffee house in Montclair, New Jersey. Uh, and when these people came together, they didn't know each other. They were different, diverse, and they were able to. And I was steering in a way without really knowing what I was doing, but they were. They left with a sense of connectedness and love. They would have never put in those terms, and I wouldn't have either at the time. I thought, you know what? If I get run over by a truck tomorrow, it's okay because I found my thing. I found that creative thing that, just like with Socrates, look at how his works and deeds have lived on, transcended time and epoch and culture. Look at how Shakespeare's have. He's more popular than ever in darkening times. Doesn't have to be that grandiose, but I had that little dialogue group that's now mushroomed all over the globe. And it's like, wow, you can start something with different intents, very modest and humble intents that can turn out to resonate with many others. But just take on that thing with great ambition and yet with great humility at the same time. You just never know
You
that
never
you
know.
might
Well, Chris,
be that change.
it's that magic moment. Unfortunately, we're out of time. But thank you so much for
Yes.
coming on the show.
Thank you so much for the gift of your time and your amazing questions.
Thank you. Our guest this hour has been author of Soul of Goodness, Christopher Phillips. To find out more about Christopher, where you can find his book and all he has to offer, visit his website, christopherphillips.com. This has been Mission Evolution with Gwilda Wiyaka. For more information or to enjoy past archived episodes, visit www.missionevolution.org. But please, be sure to join us right here next time. This mission will continue, bringing information, resources, and support to our rapidly evolving world.